Imagine being told as a kid that one day you'd conquer the entire world. Sounds crazy, right? But for one boy in ancient Macedonia, that wild dream wasn't just bedtime fantasy. It became reality. His name? Alexander, the Great. But before the titles, before the battles, before the legends, he was just a boy with a fire in his eyes and the world in his sights. Alexander was born in 356 BCE in Pella, the capital of Macedonia. His father was Philip II, a powerful and cunning king who transformed Macedonia into a military powerhouse. His mother, Olympias, was equally influential, fierce, deeply spiritual, and convinced that her son was destined for greatness. Some even said she believed Alexander was the son of Zeus himself. From the beginning, Alexander wasn't like other kids. He was sharp, intense, and fearless. When he was just 12, he tamed a wild horse no one else could approach. Rocephalus. The horse would go on to be his loyal companion in every major battle, almost like a mythic extension of himself. That moment alone told people something important. This boy wasn't afraid of challenges. He thrived on them. And he didn't do it for show. He did it because he genuinely believed he could master anything, and usually he could. But Alexander's training didn't stop at physical feats. His father brought in none other than Aristotle, the greatest philosopher of the time, to be his personal tutor. Imagine your after-school lessons, including Plato, poetry, ethics, astronomy, biology, and science, all taught by one of the smartest humans in history. Alexander soaked it all up like a sponge. And more than facts, Aristotle taught him how to think, how to question, to analyze, to lead with logic and heart. Alexander developed an insatiable hunger, not just for knowledge, but for meaning. He read the Iliad like it was a guidebook, idolizing Achilles not just as a warrior, but as a symbol of immortal legacy. He even slept with a copy under his pillow. And Alexander? He didn't just want to win battles. He wanted to be remembered forever. By his early teens, he wasn't dreaming of ruling Macedonia. He was dreaming of ruling everything. The fire was lit, and the world had no idea what was coming. As Alexander grew into his teenage years, the boy who had tamed Bucephalus was now being shaped into a warrior and a ruler. Life in the Macedonian court was tough, political, and full of drama. But Philip, ever the strategist, made sure his son wasn't just book smart. He made sure Alexander could lead men into battle. Philip surrounded him with some of the finest military minds and put him through grueling training. Alexander learned to command troops, manage logistics, and, most importantly, earn the respect of hardened soldiers twice his age. He wasn't handed loyalty. He earned it through sharp thinking and sheer willpower. When he was just 16, Philip went off to campaign and left Alexander in charge of Macedonia. And what happens? A neighboring Thracian tribe sees an opportunity and tries to invade. Rookie mistake. Alexander crushed the rebellion, captured their city, and, just like that, founded his own, Alexandropolis, at 16. While most teens were still figuring out how to ride a horse, Alexander was out there founding cities. But that was only the beginning. He joined his father on several campaigns, most notably the Battle of Chaeronea. There, Philip's forces went head-to-head with a powerful alliance of Greek city-states. Alexander, just 18, was given command of the left flank. And guess what? He didn't just hold his ground. He led a decisive charge that shattered the enemy line. That moment earned him serious street cred across the kingdom. Soldiers started whispering about the prince not just as the king's son, but as the future of Macedonia. Still, his relationship with Philip wasn't perfect. There were tensions about succession, about new wives, and about legacy. Alexander's ambition was already bigger than Macedonia, and sometimes that clashed with Philip's plans. But one thing was clear. Whether they were aligned or at odds, Alexander was no longer just a prodigy. He was a rising force with eyes set far beyond the borders of his homeland. And soon, fate would hand him the keys to the kingdom, sooner than anyone expected. Power often comes when you least expect it. For Alexander, it came suddenly and violently. In 336 BCE, Philip II was at the height of his power. He had united most of Greece under Macedonian rule and was preparing to invade the Persian Empire. It was the grand vision, the mission that would reshape the ancient world. But before he could begin, Philip was assassinated during a public celebration. The killer, a former bodyguard. The motive, still debated, but conspiracy theories have swirled for centuries. Just like that, the throne was empty, and Alexander, only 20 years old, stepped into the chaos. Now, most 20-year-olds would panic. Not Alexander. He acted fast, very fast. First, he secured loyalty from the Macedonian army, reminding them he was one of their own. Then he eliminated rival claimants and enemies, consolidating power with cold, calculated moves. His message was clear. The king is dead, long live the king. But not everyone was ready to accept it. As news of Philip's death spread, several Greek city-states, including Thebes and Athens, saw an opportunity to break free from Macedonian control. They thought the young king would be weak, naive. Another mistake. Alexander led a lightning campaign through Greece, moving with terrifying speed. In Thebes, where rebellion brewed the strongest, he didn't just crush the resistance. He destroyed the entire city. Only temples and the house of the poet Pindar were spared. Over 30,000 people were either killed or enslaved. The message hit hard. Defy Alexander and face complete annihilation. The rest of Greece fell back in line almost immediately. Sparta, even in its pride, stayed quiet. The message had been received, but Alexander wasn't content with being king of a single land. He had bigger plans, and Persia, the vast, wealthy, seemingly untouchable Persian Empire, was his next target. His father had dreamed it, but Alexander? He believed it was his destiny. He spent months preparing, gathering soldiers from across Greece, Macedonia, beyond. Engineers, doctors, scribes, philosophers. This wasn't just a military expedition. It was a cultural movement. Historians estimate around 40,000 troops were with him as he crossed the Hellespont into Asia Minor. This army was lean, loyal, and laser-focused. And before even setting foot on Persian soil, he made a symbolic stop at Troy. He paid tribute to Achilles, his childhood hero. He ran barefoot to the tomb, offered sacrifices, and took a shield from the temple as if saying, "Your time is over, old hero. I'm writing my own legend now." There, standing on the shores of Asia, Alexander cast his eyes eastward. A land of impossible riches, ancient thrones, and legendary cities lay ahead. Many had dreamed of taking Persia, but none had the fire and the sheer will that Alexander carried within him. When Alexander crossed into Asia Minor in 334 BC, he wasn't just entering a new land, he was stepping into history. Persia had ruled the known world for over 2 centuries. Their empire stretched from modern-day Turkey to India. And here comes a 22-year-old with big dreams and a few tens of thousands of troops. It sounded insane, but Alexander had a way of turning impossible into inevitable. His first real test came at the Granicus River. The Persian satraps, regional governors, gathered their forces to block him. Most generals would have waited. Most would have scouted longer. But Alexander, he charged straight through the river, straight into enemy fire. His boldness caught the Persians off guard. He nearly died in that battle, taking a blow to the head and being saved last minute by one of his officers. But in the end, he won. The Persian line collapsed, and Asia Minor was suddenly wide open. Victory at Granicus wasn't just military, it was psychological. Local cities began switching sides. Greek city-states under Persian rule welcomed Alexander as a liberator. He played it smart, respecting their customs and politics, gaining allies without spilling more blood than necessary. Then came one of the most legendary moments of his early campaign, the Gordian Knot. In the city of Gordian, there was a knot so complex, legend said whoever could untie it would rule all of Asia. Alexander looked at it, thought for a minute, and then sliced it in half with his sword. Boom. Problem solved. It was part symbolism, part PR stunt, but it worked. People started believing maybe this kid really was destined for greatness. He continued sweeping across Western Asia, taking key cities and coastal ports, weakening Persian naval power. He made sure his supply lines were secure, his allies loyal, and his legend growing with each step. And unlike most conquerors, he didn't just take, he gave. He built roads, restored temples, and honored local gods. People didn't just fear him, they started respecting him. But Persia wasn't done, not by a long shot. King Darius III, the ruler of the Persian Empire, was finally taking notice. He began gathering a massive army to crush this young invader. The two titans were now on a collision course. Alexander, barely out of his early 20s, had taken on the greatest empire the world had ever known, and was winning. But his biggest tests were yet to come. By now, Alexander wasn't just a rising star, he was a problem for the Persian Empire. And King Darius III, he was finally ready to face it head on. In 333 BCE, the two armies met at the Battle of Issus. Alexander's force was vastly outnumbered, maybe 40,000 to Darius's 100,000 or more. But numbers weren't everything. Alexander had speed, strategy, and a rock-solid belief in his destiny. The battlefield was narrow, wedged between mountains and the sea, which played right into Alexander's hands. It canceled out Darius's massive advantage in numbers. As the Persians flooded the field, Alexander didn't panic. He waited, maneuvered, and then led a direct cavalry charge at the heart of the Persian army, straight at Darius. Legend has it that Alexander locked eyes with the Persian king mid-battle, and in that moment Darius, ruler of the greatest empire on earth, panicked and fled. His army followed. The battlefield turned into chaos, and Alexander stood victorious, but that wasn't the end. As he entered Darius's abandoned camp, he found the royal family, his wife, his daughters, even his mother, and instead of treating them like prisoners, Alexander treated them with dignity and respect. That single act won him admiration across enemy lines. He wasn't just a conqueror, he was a king of honor. Next came the sieges, Tyre and Giza. Tyre was especially brutal. It was a fortified island city with strong walls and powerful defenses. Most armies would have moved on, not Alexander. He built a causeway out to the island, essentially creating a land bridge from the mainland. It took 7 months of relentless assault, but eventually the city fell. Gaza was the last major stronghold before Egypt. It was heavily fortified, and the defenders refused to surrender. Alexander was wounded, but still pressed on. Victory came, hard-earned and bloody, and with Gaza subdued, the road to Egypt lay wide open. Alexander had faced Darius, taken cities once thought untouchable, and begun reshaping the world map. But the best and boldest was still to come. After crushing Tyre and Gaza, Alexander moved south into Egypt, and unlike most places he'd entered, Egypt didn't resist. In fact, they welcomed him like a hero. Why? Simple. The Egyptians were under Persian rule for years and weren't exactly fans of their overlords. So when Alexander arrived, young, powerful, and already famous for defeating Persian armies, they saw an opportunity. They crowned him pharaoh almost immediately, embracing him not just as a conqueror but as a liberator. Alexander didn't just accept the title, he embodied it. He respected local traditions, offered sacrifices to Egyptian gods, and dressed the part. He wasn't there to erase cultures, he was there to fuse them. While in Egypt, he founded one of his most ambitious cities, Alexandria. Positioned on the Mediterranean coast, it would become one of the greatest centers of learning and trade in the ancient world, a symbol of his lasting legacy. But what happened next was even more surreal. Alexander journeyed deep into the desert to visit the Oracle of Ammon at the Siwa Oasis, basically the Egyptian version of a divine hotline. Nobody knows exactly what the priest said, but when Alexander came out, he was different. Rumors swirled. Some said the oracle confirmed he was the son of Zeus Ambi. Others claimed he now believed himself to be a living god. Whether true or not, one thing was clear. Alexander wasn't just chasing glory anymore. He believed he was destined to rule the world. Not as a man, but as something greater. Egypt had embraced him, and now he was ready to take that divine momentum and aim it straight at the beating heart of Persia. After Egypt, Alexander wasn't just a king. He was becoming a legend, but there was still one man who stood in his way, Darius III. The final confrontation between these two titans was inevitable, and it came in 331 BCE on the dusty plains of Gaugamela. This was Darius's last stand. He had learned from Essos and wasn't taking any chances this time. He assembled an army estimated at over 200,000 men, cavalry, infantry, war elephants, even scythed chariots designed to tear through ranks of soldiers. It was massive, intimidating, a true imperial army. Alexander's forces, just about 47,000. But again, numbers weren't everything. Before the battle, Alexander carefully studied the terrain and anticipated Darius' moves. On the morning of the fight, he led his troops with surgical precision, shifting formations and reacting in real time like a master chess player. When the Persians overextended their lines, Alexander saw his chance and launched a direct assault straight at Darius once more. The Persian center broke. Darius, in a move déjà vu from Issus, abandoned the battlefield. Again. But this time, it wasn't just retreat, it was collapse. The Persian army disintegrated. The empire's fate was sealed. Gaugamela wasn't just another victory, it was the victory. The battle that broke the back of the Persian Empire. With Darius on the run, Alexander marched triumphantly into Babylon, one of the most iconic cities in the ancient world. He took it without a fight, The city gates opened wide. The people showered him with praise. He wasn't just accepted, he was celebrated. From there, he moved to Susa, then to Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of Persia, a symbol of Achaemenid power. And here, Alexander made a statement. After initially showing restraint, he let his troops loot the city. Then he set fire to the royal palace. Some say it was revenge for the Persian burning of Athens during the Greco-Persian Wars. Others think it was a drunken accident. Either way, it was symbolic. The old empire was gone. Alexander was now the master of Asia. At just 25 years old, he had conquered the greatest empire the world had ever known. But Alexander wasn't finished, not even close. The landscape of India unfolds before Alexander's eyes. The lush greenery contrasts sharply with the arid plains of Persia and Mesopotamia. Yet the challenges remain. The men are weary, their bodies worn from years of constant campaigning. Their resolve, once unshakable, now shows cracks as they march into the unknown. With each step, the horizon grows more uncertain. Alexander's army, stretched thin from battle after battle, faces a new challenge: the unknown. The lands of India are unfamiliar and full of uncertainty, but the promise of glory spurs them on. The next monumental clash is with King Porus of the Punjab, a formidable ruler who commands an army of war elephants. In the heat of battle, the two forces collide at the Battle of the Hydaspes. The sound of war cries, the crash of metal, and the thundering of elephant hooves fill the air as Alexander's tactical brilliance faces off against Porus's overwhelming numbers. The Battle of the Hydaspes was unlike any the Macedonian forces had faced before. Porus's war elephants towered over the battlefield, creating chaos and terror. But Alexander, ever the strategist, used the river itself to his advantage, outmaneuvering the larger army and securing victory. Despite the victory, the toll on the men is clear. Many have fallen, and the spirit of conquest begins to falter. The Macedonian soldiers, exhausted by years of relentless campaigning, are no longer the invincible force they once were. The Indian campaign took everything from the Macedonians: the endless battles, the scorching heat, the unfamiliar terrain. It was too much. Alexander, who had never been one to retreat, stood before his men and saw the signs. As word of his troops' exhaustion reached his ears, Alexander's dream of further conquests, of marching toward the riches of India, perhaps even the fabled lands of the East, came to a sudden halt. His men, weary and homesick, refused to march on. The cry of "Back to the West" echoed louder than any battle cry, and so, reluctantly, Alexander led his army westward once again. They turned their backs on the fabled riches of India and began the long journey home, a journey that would lead them through harsh deserts and across hostile territories. Yet the question remained: could the dream of an empire stretching from Greece to the ends of the earth ever truly die? The great king, who had been a god in the eyes of his men, now faced a reality more human than ever before. The journey home would mark the end of Alexander's campaign, but it was not the end of his legacy. His empire, though incomplete, would forever change the course of history. But Alexander, too, was human, flesh and blood like the soldiers who had followed him from Macedonia to the farthest reaches of the known world. As they began their long march back, there was no fanfare, no grand triumph, just the weary steps of men who had fought for a dream that for the moment was no more. The end of Alexander's campaign was not a final chapter, but a turning point, an uncertain one. The world he had sought to conquer was vast and unyielding, and for the first time, the dream of conquering it all seemed as distant as the stars. The sun sets over the mighty city of Babylon. Alexander, now only 32 years old, is at the peak of his power. Yet death looms closer than any enemy he has ever faced. It was in Babylon, the city he dreamed of making his capital, where Alexander's life would come to an unexpected end. The man who had conquered most of the known world was suddenly struck by a mysterious illness. Within days, his once indomitable body was reduced to a shadow of its former self. The details of his death remain shrouded in mystery. Was it fever, poisoned wine, or a curse? The theories abound, but none have ever been proven. What is certain is that the great conqueror, the God King, died in his prime, leaving the world to wonder what might have been. Alexander's death sent shockwaves through his empire. The greatest military mind of his age, who had led armies across continents, was gone. His passing left the empire without a clear heir, plunging the vast territories into chaos. In the wake of Alexander's death, the vast empire he had built unraveled. His generals, known as the Diadochi, divided the territories among themselves, leading to decades of conflict. But despite the fragmentation, Alexander's empire left an indelible mark on history. But at what cost? His ambition, his drive to conquer all, led to a life cut tragically short. Mortality, a force even greater than his empire, claimed him before he could see the full fruition of his dreams. And yet, his legacy remains timeless and unbroken. As we reflect on Alexander's life, we're reminded of the power of ambition and the fragility of time. What we leave behind, our actions, our dreams, are often the only things that endure. If you enjoyed this journey through history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more stories of the past that continue to shape our present.